crossroads in American history, both from a moral perspective as well as an economic perspective. And the reality is today, as I think most Americans understand, is that the middle class of our country is collapsing. Over the last 10 years, median family income has gone down by $2,500. Millions of Americans who have lost their job secured new jobs at substantially lower pay. Younger workers finding it very, very hard to get a job at a livable wage. Furthermore, Mr. President, what we don't talk about terribly often here on the floor of the Senate or certainly in the corporate media is the rather unfortunate reality that in the United States we have the most unequal distribution of income and of wealth of any major country on earth. Today, the top 1% of earners makes 23% of all income. Top 1% earns 23% of every dollar, and that is more than the bottom 50%. Top 1% makes more money than the bottom 50%. The percentage of income going to the top 1%, Mr. President, has nearly tripled since the 1970s. Between 1980 and 2005, 80% of all new income in America went to the top 1%. Today, when we talk about distribution of wealth, not income, the numbers are frankly beyond belief. Today in America, if you can believe it, the wealthiest 400 Americans, a very small number, out of a nation of over 300 million people, own more wealth than the bottom 150 million Americans. 400, 150, and that gap between the very, very rich and everybody else is growing wider. Mr. President, I don't have to describe economically what's going on in this country because almost everybody understands it. Real unemployment today is not 8.9%, it's closer to 16%. Today in America, 50 million people have no health insurance. Today in America, seniors and disabled vets understand that they have not received a Social Security COLA in 3 years. So what we start with, Mr. President, when we look at America today is a middle class which is disappearing, poverty which is increasing, and the people on top doing phenomenally well. Now, given that reality, one might think that the Congress would be actively involved in trying to protect the middle class and working families and lower-income people. But if one believed that, one would be sorely mistaken. Mr. President, just last December, 4 months ago, Congress passed legislation to provide huge tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires by extending the Bush tax cuts to the top 2% and by even more by lowering the estate tax for the top 0.3%. So at a time when the people on top are already doing phenomenally well, what Congress did against my vote in December was make the wealthiest people even wealthier. So 4 months ago, after giving huge tax breaks to millionaires and billionaires, growing the deficit, our Republican friends and some Democrats come back and they say, well, you know, now we have a real deficit problem. We made the problem worse in December, so now we really have got to deal with the deficit, and we're going to do it by making devastating cuts to programs that low and moderate income Americans desperately depend upon. What we are looking at, Mr. President, is the Robin Hood principle in reverse. We are taking from working families who are struggling to survive taking hundreds of billions of dollars and giving it to millionaires and billionaires. In my view, this is grossly immoral, and it is also very, very bad economics. Let me just touch on some of the cuts that are coming down the pike in the 2011 budget. At a time of soaring fuel prices, in the state of Vermont, and I'm sure in Minnesota, a lot of people heat with oil. Cost is going up. The Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, LIHEAP, would be cut by $390 million. In Vermont, many of the people who use the LIHEAP program are low-income senior citizens. So we give tax breaks to billionaires, and we go after low-income senior citizens and say, sorry, you may have to go cold. At a time when the cost of college education is getting unaffordable for many, many low and moderate income families in this country, hundreds of thousands of young people have given up their college dream. Because of the high cost of college, Pell Grants would be reduced by an estimated $35 billion over 10 years, including a nearly $500 million cut this year, and Pell Grants are the major source of federal funding to help low and moderate income college students go to school. Mr. President, at a time when 50 million Americans have no health insurance, community health centers would be cut by $600 million. It's an issue I work very, very hard on. Community health centers provide access to primary health care, dental care, low-cost prescription drugs, and mental health counseling for some 20 million Americans right now. Our hope was to expand that to 40 million Americans. And when you do that, you save money because people do not end up in the emergency room. They do not end up in the hospital sicker than they should have been. $600 million for community health centers were cut. Children's health insurance program cut by $3.5 billion. Time when poverty is increasing. Women, infant, and children WIC program, nutrition program for low-income pregnant women will be cut by $500 million. At a time when we have such high unemployment rates and when we want to put Americans to work rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure, including our rail system, which is now far behind Europe, Japan, and even China, federal funding for high-speed rail will be eliminated in the budget we're going to be voting on very soon, representing a cut of $2.9 billion. Public transportation would be cut by nearly $1 billion, a 20% reduction. Mr. President, I know in Vermont, and I expect all over this country, local communities are struggling with their budgets. Police departments are not getting the budgets and the manpower that they need, and yet in this budget that we'll be voting on, local law enforcement funding would be cut by $296 million. At a time when homelessness is increasing, when we need more low-income housing, public housing would be cut by $605 million. Mr. President, that is the 2000 budget agreement that was just reached a few days ago. And what is absolutely incredible about that budget is that deficit reduction falls totally on the backs of low and moderate income families, on people who will not be able to get health care at community health centers, young people who will not be able to go to college, senior citizens who will not be able to heat their homes in the wintertime. That's where this budget is balanced, on the backs of the weak, the vulnerable, the children, the elderly, and the poor. And yet, at the same time, as the wealthiest people are becoming wealthier, this budget does not ask for one penny from millionaires and billionaires. At a time when major corporation after major corporation enjoys huge tax loopholes, so not only do they avoid paying any federal income taxes, in many cases, such as General Electric, they actually get a rebate from the IRS. This budget does not ask corporate America to pay 1 penny more in corporate income taxes. And that's where we are with the 2011 budget, and now we're looking in a short period of time at the 2012 budget. And, Mr. President, if you think this 2011 budget is a moral and economic disgrace, wait till you hear what this 2000 budget, the so-called Paul Ryan Tea Party budget, which, as I understand it, will be voted upon in the House, likely passing later this week. That budget will slash trillions of dollars from Medicare, converting Medicare into a voucher program, meaning that seniors will have to pay substantially more for their health care than they currently do. And, Mr. President, the interesting question that has not yet been answered about this is if you are or will be, when this Ryan budget will go into effect, a senior citizen living on $14,000 or $15,000 a year, of which millions of seniors currently live, how are you going to be able to come up with thousands and thousands of dollars to pay for your cancer treatment or the other problems that senior citizens have? How are you going to do it? There is no money available for you to do it. So what Ryan's budget does is demand that low-income seniors pay for money with money they don't have. What happens? I'm not sure I've heard that answer. If you are a low-income senior citizen and you're asked to come up with thousands of dollars out of your pocket and you don't have that money, what do? The Ryan budget would savage Medicaid, education, the environment, infrastructure, and other programs that tens of millions of Americans depend upon. But here is the kicker. We savage Medicare, Medicaid, education, and many other programs that moderate and middle-class families depend upon in order to give even more tax breaks to the wealthiest people in this country and to the largest corporations. After savaging health care in America for middle-income and low-income families, the Ryan budget would reduce the tax rates for the wealthiest people in this country from 35% to 25%, corporate income taxes the same level, 35 to 25%. I suspect that there are people who are listening to me now who just don't believe it. They say, come on, you're not serious about it. At a time when the middle class is collapsing and the rich are getting richer, you're not telling me that people in the House are about to vote on a budget which will give huge tax breaks to millionaires and billionaires and to large corporations and then cut back and throw millions more off of health care. You're not really serious. Check it out. I am serious. This is exactly what the Ryan Tea Party budget, which will likely pass the House, has in mind. So, Mr. President, as I began saying, we are at a pivotal moment in the history, modern history of this country, and that is whether or not we move, in a sense, into an oligarchic form of society where a few people on top have incredible amounts of wealth and incredible amounts of political power, while the middle class disappears and poverty increases. That's where we are right now. And I would hope very much that the American people engage in this debate and to tell members of the Senate, to tell members of the House that it is morally wrong and very poor economics to cut back on programs desperately needed by working families while giving huge tax breaks to people who absolutely don't need that. Mr. President, with that, I would yield the floor and note the absence of the Chair.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Later this week, the House will vote on its fiscal year 2012 budget resolution. Congressman Paul Ryan, the author of that blueprint, calls it a path to prosperity.
Question.
I'd be happy to yield to my colleague.
Would the senator agree I was going to be speaking at 4 o'clock at the conclusion of the senator's remarks that I be recognized as if in morning business for up to 30 minutes?
Mr. President, I would move that immediately after I finish speaking that Senator. We had a speaker who was going to go after you did. Could you limit it to 15 minutes? Or?
No, sir, I could not. I've got to have 30 minutes, and the floor has been pretty empty today, but I make that request.
Okay, I ask unanimous consent that immediately after I finish, Senator Inhofe be recognized for up to 30 minutes, and then Senator Franken be recognized immediately after Senator Inhofe.
Without objection.
So, Mr. President, just resuming my remarks, Paul Ryan, the author of that blueprint, called it the path to prosperity. Mr. President, it may be a path to austerity, but it is hardly a path to prosperity. Nonetheless, with the negotiations finished just days ago on last year's budget, Congressman Ryan has succeeded in jump-starting the debate about next year's. The President himself will join this conversation about how to do long-term deficit reduction in a major address tomorrow at GWU, George Washington University. This is a debate we must have, and the President's entrance to it comes not a moment too soon. It will make for a powerful contrast with the Republicans' plan. The contrast we will hear from our President tomorrow will likely not be in the commitment to deficit reduction. Paul Ryan's goal in his budget is to trim the deficit by $1.6 trillion over the next 10 years. He does not succeed in meeting this target, according to CBO. In fact, budget experts say his proposal only achieves $155 billion in net deficit reduction. But the number itself is not the issue. Without a doubt, we must be ambitious in setting a target for deficit reduction. We cannot be gun-shy about achieving fiscal discipline. So no, the contrast will not be in how much we seek to reduce the deficit. It will be in how we go about doing so. The Republicans would like the looming debate to be one about numbers, but instead it will be about priorities. And Mr. President, the Ryan budget has all the wrong priorities. The House Republican budget puts the entire burden of reducing the deficit on senior citizens, students, and middle-class families. At the same time, it protects corporate subsidies for oil companies, lets waste at the Pentagon go untouched, and would give even more tax breaks to the millionaires amongst us. In short, the Ryan budget puts the middle class last instead of first. As a result, it will never pass the Senate. In the days since he first rolled out his budget proposal, Congressman Ryan has been hailed for taking on the tough challenges. And we certainly salute him for putting out a plan. But a closer look at his proposal shows that it is not bold at all. In leaving Pentagon spending and revenues completely untouched, Ryan's budget used exactly to his party's orthodoxy. Some of the columns I read that says it takes courage, well, maybe it takes courage for someone from a different political philosophy to say what he said, but not for a conservative Republican to say what he said. Ryan's budget doesn't gore a single Republican ox. It is a rigid, ideological document. Consider what Congressman Ryan wants to do on Medicare. In the name of ideology, Paul Ryan's budget proposes getting rid of Medicare as it exists today and replacing it with a private system that would cut benefits. Mr. President, We've seen this movie before. 5 years ago, President Bush tried to sell the country on a plan to privatize Social Security. The public rejected it. Well, if you didn't like what President Bush tried to do to Social Security, just wait until you see what Paul Ryan and the House Republicans want to do to Medicare. Madam President, their budget plan proposes putting the Medicare system into the hands of private insurance companies. That is a recipe for disaster. It would mean an end to Medicare as we know it. Beginning in 2022, Americans turning 65 would no longer be enrolled in Medicare, but instead would receive a voucher to go shopping for their own health insurance on the open market. Insurance companies, however, would not be required to honor that voucher, which would average about $8,000. Many private insurance plans for seniors far exceed that price already today. But under the Ryan plan, seniors who cannot find an affordable plan at the value of their voucher would simply have to make up the difference themselves out of their own pockets. This problem would only worsen over time as health care costs rise. Ryan caps Medicare spending at the level of inflation, even though historically health care costs rise higher than that. As Ryan's voucher covers a smaller and smaller fraction of actual health care costs, seniors would have to cover the gap out of pocket. That is why Alice Rivlin, a Democrat and President Clinton's former OMB director who worked with Congressman Ryan on his approach for a time, has distanced herself from this final product. She told the Washington Post that she opposes the Ryan plan, quote, "In the Ryan version, he has lowered the rate of growth, and I don't think that's defensible. It pushed too much of the cost onto the beneficiaries." Let me repeat that last part of Alice Rivlin, Congressman Ryan's partner for a time in this proposal. It pushed, she writes, it pushed too much of the cost onto the beneficiaries. Other Medicare experts agree with Rivlin. Stephen Zuckerman, a health care economist at the Nonpartisan Urban Institute, said, quote, "The most serious flaw is that the focus of this approach is on limiting federal spending on Medicare without concern about the potential of this change to shift costs to Medicare beneficiaries. A better way, Madam President, to rein in Medicare spending would be to trim the waste and inefficiency out of the delivery system. Anyone who's gone through the health care system knows all the waste and inefficiencies. The legendary stories of a doctor waving as you go into the emergency room and then you never see him again, and then there's a $4,000 charge. These kinds of things. But it turns out that Ryan's plan does nothing to reduce overall health care costs. It increases them. We have to preserve the benefits to people, but make the cost of delivering them less expensive. That's what every other country in the world does. That's what we have to do. But the Ryan plan doesn't do that. The Ryan plan not only doesn't try to eliminate the waste and efficiency out of the delivery system, but it does nothing to reduce overall health care costs. It actually increases them. According to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, in 2030, traditional Medicare insurance would cost just 60% of a private policy purchased with Ryan's voucher. In other words, the Ryan health care plan would cost two-thirds more than traditional Medicare. Not only would the Ryan plan increase insurance costs, it would force seniors to shoulder a higher share of these costs. CBO said, quote, this is CBO, not Chuck Schumer, the nonpartisan CBO. Under the proposal, CBO writes, most elderly people who would be entitled to premium support payments would pay more for their health care than they would pay under the current Medicare system. How much more? Madam President, it's staggering when you look at the numbers. Here they are. The seniors' share of health care costs. We all know now, even with Medicare, seniors have to pay some of it themselves. But now they pay 25%. Under the Ryan budget, 68%. So there's this voucher, and it goes to the insurance companies. Health care costs more, and seniors pay more. Why the heck would we do that? This is a crippling burden that would drive the average Medicare recipient into poverty. It is not only too much to ask for our seniors, it destroys the foundation of our health care system. Madam President, just to check on the time, I believed I said after I finished, I asked unanimous consent that Congressman Inhofe would follow me.
The senator has used 10 minutes. Did the senator wish for more than 10 minutes?
I did, and that was the intention of my unanimous consent request.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I'll be finished in a little while, and I thank my colleague from Oklahoma. So, the bottom line is the House Republican budget would cause the cost of health insurance to rise and then would make seniors pay a greater share of that higher cost. It is a cut in benefits plan. It is a cut in benefits plan, plain and simple. If we are serious about reining in Medicare spending, there's a far better starting place than the Ryan budget. It's the health care law passed by Congress last year. Republicans are patting themselves on the back lately for leading on entitlement reform. But when it comes to reining in the runaway costs of Medicare, the truth is the President did it first, and he did it better. In the health care law, Mr. President, we certainly didn't complete the job, but we made a good start on reducing waste, inefficiency, and duplication in the system. We started down the path of making delivery system reforms. We set up a system for studying the effectiveness of different methods and treatments so that care could be delivered more efficiently. We made a down payment on shifting the larger health care system away from a fee-for-service model towards a system that pays providers for episodes of care. The Ryan proposal adopts none of these cost-saving approaches. In fact, his budget calls for the repeal of the health care law altogether. Left unsaid is that this would have the side effect of reopening the donut hole, another hit to Medicare beneficiaries. Now, if the Ryan budget's only goal was to end Medicare, that would be ample cause enough to work tooth and nail to defeat it. But the Ryan budget doesn't even put most of its savings from ending Medicare towards deficit reduction. Amazingly, it cuts Medicare, ends Medicare as we know it, and takes whatever savings it produces and gives more tax breaks to the wealthiest Americans. That's right, Madam President. Ryan's budget not only seeks to permanently extend President Bush's tax cuts for millionaires, he wants to cut their taxes even lower than the Bush levels. In fact, under the Ryan proposal, millionaires would pay a rate so low that it was last seen in the days of Herbert Hoover. What about shared sacrifice? As unbelievable as it sounds, Congressman Ryan wants to give millionaires and billionaires an extra tax break. Ryan's budget proposal would bring down the top rate from 35% to 25% for those who are very wealthy. This would make for the lowest level of taxing the wealthiest among us since 1931, when the Great Depression was raging and Herbert Hoover was president. This is the trade Congressman Ryan proposes we make. Cut Medicare benefits for seniors so we can afford to give millionaires an extra tax break. This is exactly the opposite of what the public wants. They don't think the millionaires and billionaires should even be getting George Bush's tax cut, let alone an extra one on top of that. Now, I have nothing against millionaires and billionaires. God bless them. Many of them made their money the good old-fashioned American way, but they don't need a tax break when we're cutting Medicare and cutting everything else. In last month's NBC, and most Americans agree with me, in last month's NBC Wall Street Journal poll, that asked Americans what proposals they most support to reduce the deficit, 81% of Americans, including a majority of Republicans, as I recall, said that they would support a tax on millionaires, the highest polling answer. One of the lowest polling answers was, you guessed it, cutting Medicare benefits. So the Ryan budget has its priorities completely upside down. Now, you may ask, if Congressman Ryan puts all his savings from Medicare into millionaire tax breaks, how does he propose to achieve any deficit reduction? The answer is by targeting the programs most important to the middle class. It turns out that the Republican plan to end Medicare is also a plan to end other important programs. For example, the Republican plan to end Medicare is additionally also a plan to cut tens of thousands of teachers. And the Republican plan to end Medicare is additionally also a plan to cut Head Start for kids. And the Republican plan to end Medicare is additionally also a plan to cut medical research on diseases like cancer. And the Republican plan to end Medicare is additionally also a plan to cut clean energy projects that create jobs and help us become energy independent. In all, the Ryan plan assumes a steady squeezing of government until by 2050 the total cost of everything, save for Social Security and health care, is shrunk from 12% of the GDP to just 3%. But he doesn't spell out a single detail of how to achieve those cuts. He has a number but no specifics. That is the definition of a meat-axe approach, as opposed to an approach that uses a smart, sharp scalpel. Even though the Ryan plan doesn't spell out where the cuts would come from to meet his goal, it isn't a total mystery. We can fill in the blanks. The just completed debate on fiscal year 2011 budget offers plenty of hints what the Republican approach to cutting spending is. In the debate we just had, Republicans wanted to cut the very programs that create good-paying jobs and help the middle class. They targeted everything from cancer research to financial aid to college. We fended off many of their worst cuts by successfully pushing Republicans to include $17 billion in cuts from the mandatory side. We also got them to agree to reduce Pentagon spending by nearly $3 billion compared to their original budget. This was not the Republicans' preferred way to reduce the deficit. Because of ideology, they disproportionately targeted the domestic discretionary part of the budget for cutting. But our deficit problems weren't caused by Head Start and cancer research, and we won't fix them by going after Head Start and cancer research. In the budget debates to come, Madam President, we need to broaden the playing field beyond domestic discretionary spending. We should include, for instance, waste in the Defense Department. The Pentagon makes up half of the discretionary side of the budget, but Republicans continue to treat it as off-limits. Ryan himself leaves it virtually untouched, save for its symbolic trim. To say there isn't waste at the Pentagon, like there is waste everywhere else in the budget, is absurd. The bottom line, any budget that leaves defense and revenues off the table is ultimately not serious. We need an all-of-the-above approach that puts all parts of the budget on the table. A dollar cut from mandatory spending or the Pentagon is just as good as a dollar cut from non-defense discretionary spending. Deficit reduction is an important goal, but the sacrifice must be shared. The Ryan budget fails that test. In conclusion, the Democratic Senate will not stand for any proposals that seek to balance the budget on the backs of the middle class and of seniors. I look forward to hearing the President's remarks tomorrow. And as for Congressman Ryan, I would encourage him to go back to the drawing board and come up with a fairer, more balanced plan. Thank you, Madam President, and I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The Senator from Oklahoma.
First of all, let me thank my good friend from New York for allowing me to have this time and kind of change and rearrange. And while I do appreciate his generosity, I have to say I don't agree with what he said. And that comes as no surprise to my friend from from New York. I would only make one comment, one statement that I heard him say toward the end of his comments was, every other country in the world would do it this way. That's the whole crux of it right there. I often wonder, if you look at the other countries, they're all trying to get to our system. They all envy America for its system of freedom, of health delivery. And you wonder sometimes if government-run health care is better. And that's what this is. That's what the Obama administration is trying to do. If it's better, then why is it doesn't work anywhere? I've often looked at it. It doesn't work in Canada. It doesn't work in Denmark. It doesn't work in the UK. It doesn't work in any of the other places. And yet, they always say, well, it'll work here. You know, a lot of my liberal friends said, well, if I were running it, it would work. Let me just say, we've got a great system. We do need, and a little class warfare, I guess, is healthy now and then, and we had a little bit of that in the last 20 minutes. Let me mention something. I'm going to be very offensive right now to a lot of people, certainly to the Ouattara group, that is the rebels that are taking over in Cote d'Ivoire. I'm going to be offensive to our United Nations. I'm going to be offensive to the French and to our own State Department. And this little girl here, let me introduce to you, if I could, Madam President. Her name is Zagita Marie Rayford. Zagita Marie. Zagita, by the way, is an Ethiopian name. It means God's grace. This little girl we found when she's only 2 years old. I happened to be in Ethiopia. She is an orphan. And my daughter Molly, in fact, I should hold this up. These are my 20 kids and grandkids, Madam President. So, so this is one of them. My daughter Molly had nothing but boys, and so she adopted Zagita Marie. And the reason I bring this up right now is because she came up to me the other day. Now, that little girl, she was 2 days old when we first saw her, almost gone. She's now 10 years old. She reads at college level. She's a brilliant little girl. She came up to the other day and she said, Popeye, let me explain that. See, I is for Inhofe, that's me, so it's Mama and Popeye, is that all right? Well, right. See, she came and said, Popeye, why is it you do things nobody else would do? And I said, that's why I do them. So I will say to you that Zagita Marie got her answer, and that's the reason I'm talking today. I happen to be very familiar with Africa, and I have been for quite some time on the Senate Armed Services Committee. I think they consider me the point man for Africa. We currently started working with Africa back at 9/11. In 9/11, we made a decision that while the squeeze in terrorism in the Middle East is going down through Djibouti and the Horn of Africa, we need to help the Africans build African brigades, supply them with train and equip, with different programs, help send their officers to the United States to train. And it was a good program, and I sometimes kind of joke around by saying, since I was the only member of the Senate Armed Services Committee who knew where Africa was, I took it on. So anyway, I do have a background in Africa, and for that reason, I'm going to speak for the 4th time in a week, actually the 5th time, on the crisis. I'll leave it up here if that's, we want to see it, Zagita, yeah. For the 5th time, the crisis in Cote d'Ivoire. Cote d'Ivoire is a West African country. We've been reading about it. You don't read much about it. It's sub-Saharan Africa. Nobody cares about sub-Saharan Africa. They do care about Libya. That's up north, still part of the African continent, but not sub-Saharan Africa. Anyway, the news is reporting that President Gbagbo, that's the seated president, and his wife Simone were captured yesterday by the French military forces, acting with the rebel forces of Alassane Ouattara. There is a videotape of both President and First Lady in custody. And you can put up the other one right now. According to the BBC and Reuters, that after the UN and the French helicopters repeatedly attacked the presidential palace, French special forces stormed the building with up to 30 French tanks and armored vehicles and took them both from the presidential palace to the Gulf Hotel, killing untold hundreds or thousands of people. We can't tell. This right here, Madam President, is a picture that was taken. This is a helicopter right here, a United Nations helicopter. It was encouraged to be used by the French. The French said, we authorize you. We're going to send our troops in there with you. We're going to do whatever they're doing. This is Abidjan. This is the capital of Cote d'Ivoire. And I happen to, where they're hitting their targets there, that was an area where they have a lot of their ordnance. And I've been there. And I've seen it. They're all scattered, and you have little huts with galvanized steel roofs over them with countless, hundreds and hundreds of people. They're all dead. They have to be. They can't live. And there it is. That's the picture. Put the other one up to give you an idea of what is happening. There it is. It was blown up. They're peppering the entire town. I don't know why. Here I'm a member of the United States Senate, and I can't get even our State Department to look in to see how many people they murdered that night. That was Monday night. A week ago tonight is when that happened. We don't know, but they were murdered. I'm thankful that both the President Gbagbo, and the First Lady, Simone Gbagbo, are still alive, but they've been brutally mutilated. I condemn, however, the use of so-called peacekeeping forces made up of the United Nations and French forces in the attacks on Abidjan and the presidential palace, and these forces that have caused countless deaths in the densely populated city of Abidjan, 4 million people. I hope every president of sub-Saharan Africa is watching right now, because what happened there can happen to any country in sub-Saharan Africa. Africa has 52 countries. I think there are 40 of those, 41 of those are sub-Saharan Africa. The multiple firings of the United Nations and French missiles into downtown Abidjan are like firing missiles into downtown New York City. You don't really know how many people are dead. You won't know for a long time. Who knows how many hundreds, if not thousands, of innocent people were killed as a result of the UN and the French bombing just a week ago tonight. Mr. President, this is not peacekeeping. This is war-making. This is not the role of the United Nations. And I question why the French are participating in this battle. The African Union has also condemned this foreign military intervention. You know, why don't we listen to Africa? Africa, for so many years, they were used, they were abused, they were by the colonialism. And certainly no one has been worse and more offensive in that than the French have. But they don't listen to Africa. I called up a good friend, President Museveni of Uganda, the other day and asked him what he thought. He has the courage to put something down in writing, which I'm going to read to you, Madam President. This is from President Museveni, and this is an East African country, not West Africa like Cote d'Ivoire. He said, quote, "I have not been happy with the way the United Nations and international community, especially the French, have responded to the events of the post-election Ivory Coast. I desired that it would have been ideal for a thorough investigation into the alleged election rigging, and it be done by a credible and independent body under the African Union leadership and guidance, instead of violently forcing Laurent Gbagbo out of power without a hearing. I'm not pleased with the way international community can sanction a situation of bloodbath in the domestic affairs of African countries." You know, I'm just halfway through reading what he said here, and I'm reminded, you know, why aren't we listening to Africans? And he's not the only one. I think every African president would agree with what I'm saying right now. He went on to say, "I would prefer a peaceful intervention by the African Union Committee that would investigate into the matter, give the parties a fair hearing, and come out with a workable recommendation that can promote peace and stability in the region. The recommendation would include the possibility of a peaceful and conciliatory settlement towards a power-sharing deal, as was done in the case of Kenya and Zimbabwe. We all know about that. At this point, I believe, still this is President Museveni of Uganda quoting, "I believe he would be happy to have a team of capable African leaders chosen under the auspices of the African Union to work on a peaceful end to the conflict in Ivory Coast. I believe that the African Union must be given the opportunity to handle the matter in-house. I am, of course, not pleased with the way the UN and the international community has directly thrown their weight in support of Alassane Ouattara and now recognizing him as president." President Museveni from Uganda. I have talked personally to many other presidents, and I could be quoting all of them right now, but essentially that's the statement to which they all agree. And, Madam President, I've been informed that this reflects the current sentiments of the African Union, too, actually including the current AU Chairman Obiang, who condemned the foreign military intervention in Cote d'Ivoire, saying that, quote, Africa does not need external influence. Africa must manage its own affairs. That's what the Africans said. That's President Obiang. President Obiang is the president of the African Union. And the Kenyan Prime Minister, Odinga, who happens to be here, and I'll be meeting with him in just a few minutes, was quoted yesterday as saying that President Gbagbo, that's the president who was abused, thrown out of office, has been captured, and I say that he should not be hurt. I have actually already sent word to Mr. Ouattara saying that Gbagbo should not be hurt. If he wants to go out into exile, he should be allowed to go into exile, but he needs to be treated humanely. That's all I'm asking our State Department and the United Nations to do, and they won't do it. I've warned the UN and the French on the floor 4 times in the past week that they would have blood on their hands if they continued supporting the rebel forces of Alassane Ouattara and continued the bombing of the capital of Cote d'Ivoire, Abidjan, and I didn't agree with the immediate ceasefire. Well, that's what's been happening over the last week, 10 days. I said on April 4th, and I'm quoting myself now on the floor, standing right here at this podium, I said, I think we can avert a real tragedy, something maybe comparable to what happened in 1994 in Rwanda with the genocide. We all remember that. We also remember that we were warned. We weren't warned, but the United Nations was. The Secretary General, we now know, was warned that the genocide was going to take place in 1994 in Rwanda. 800,000 people hacked to death with machetes. And the world stood idly by. Of course, that's sub-Saharan Africa. Nobody cared. I called for a ceasefire in Abidjan. No one responded. This was 8 days ago. You know, I wonder sometimes, why is it nobody cares about sub-Saharan Africa? I remember way back in 1998, when under President Clinton, they were going to send troops into Kosovo. And the excuse they were using at that time was ethnic cleansing. And I said on this Senate floor, I said, why is it we're all concerned about ethnic cleansing in Kosovo for every one person in Kosovo who's been ethnically cleansed on a given day? 100 in any one country in sub-Saharan Africa has, but nobody cares. Nobody cares about sub-Saharan Africa. Why is there no outcry for these millions of people who are being brutally murdered in other places in the world in sub-Saharan Africa? I have to say this, and I know that I'm repeating what I said in 1998 on the floor. I have to say this, and I know it's very unpopular to say it, but I'm going to quote a guy whose name is Roger Wilkins. He's professor of history and American culture at George Mason University. He said, quote, I think it is pretty clear U.S. foreign policy is geared to the European-American sensibility, which takes the lives of white people much more seriously than the lives of people who are not white. What's he saying there? I think I know what he's saying. But no one mobilized on behalf of the 500 people who were shot, hacked, and burned to death in the village in eastern Congo, Central Africa, around the same time. No outrage was expressed on behalf of the many other innocents who had been misfortunate of being slain. You know, I read this because I knew this was going to happen. And so it was only 5 days ago that I warned that this was going to happen. So anyway, on April 5th, I said that the Ouattara has tried to deny his involvement in the slaughter of up to 1,000 innocent people. This is April 5th, a little over a week ago. There it is, folks. That town is called Duquet. It's in Cote d'Ivoire, a small community. It's the western town of Duquet. His forces I'm talking about Ouattara, took the town earlier last week after the Gbagbo forces had gone. They were already gone. They had to be the Ouattara forces. We know now, Mr. President, that these people were shot, macheted, and burned to death by the Ouattara forces. You may remember me quoting on the floor here just a few days ago a BBC report back last week that quoted the BBC reporter Andrew Harding, who said of the Duquet massacre, this is it now, folks, just a little over a week ago. He said, I spot 4 pigs eating something dark in a charred courtyard, standing by a newly dug mass grave. A UN soldier from Morocco is choking with rage and grief. I ask him if any of the dead that the hogs were eating were children. He nods and begins to sob quietly into his face mask. And I pointed out that The Guardian, a British newspaper, quoted the UN mission which said that, quote, traditional hunters known as dozos fought alongside Ouattra's forces and took part in killing 330 people in the western town of Duquet, and that Julan Geffa, the deputy head of the Human Rights Division of the United Nations mission in Ivory Coast, blamed at least 220 of the deaths on pro-Ouattara forces. I repeat, this massacre was not caused by Gbagbo forces, but by the Ouattara forces who had taken the town. The Gbagbo forces had left a week earlier. There they are. Look at them. Mutilated bodies, chewed up, burned. It's in Ouattara, a very small community in the western part of Cote d'Ivoire. I repeat, the massacre was not caused by their forces. I think we all know that. Again, I called, this is last week, for a ceasefire, and no one responded, just a week ago. And on April 7th and 8th, I pointed out the United Nations and the French were bombing downtown Abidjan near the presidential palace, where hundreds of young supporters of President Gbagbo had circled the presidential palace, making a human shield from the bombing. This is what they did. All these kids, all they had were baseball bats and 2x4s in a circle surrounding the palace to protect their president, President Gbagbo, and his family of about 17 that were there, and his wife Simone. Now, you saw a minute ago in this one right here that, do you think there's anything left of those kids surrounding the palace? No, they were all mowed down. So we called for, that was on the 7th and 8th. Who knows how many of them were killed? I can't imagine any of them had lived through it. Mr. President, I've also pointed out on April 8th that there were roving death squads. There they are right there, folks. That's Ouattara people. The roving death squads who, quote, are disappearing. This is the word they use. They're disappearing supporters of President Gbagbo. That means they're killing them. I called again for an immediate ceasefire. No one responded, not our State Department, not the United Nations, certainly not the French. Mr. President, I also pointed out that I believe massive vote fraud occurred in November 28th in the election in 2010, Cote d'Ivoire presidential election between President Laurent Gbagbo and the rebel leader Alassane Ouattara from up north. That's the Muslim part of Cote d'Ivoire. I submitted evidence in 2 letters to the State Department that showed massive vote fraud allowed Ouattara to steal the election. In one instance, showed that in the first round, we call them here, we would call this a primary and then a primary runoff. In the first round, in one of the 5 districts in the north, they miscounted, they tabulated them and just added 95,000 additional votes. I documented all of this. If we had 95,000 additional votes in each one of the 5 northern districts, then clearly President Gbagbo won re-election. And in another case, if you look at what they had in the primaries, what we call primaries, in the first round, President Gbagbo got thousands of votes in the northern 5 districts. And when they did the runoff, he got zero votes. That's a statistical impossibility. What did our State Department do? Nothing. I didn't receive it. I finally received a response to my 2 letters saying that they think that this is all fraudulent. They're not going to change their mind. You know, this is sub-Saharan Africa. Do they really care? I can only conclude, Mr. President, that our State Department is engaging in a whitewash of any credible investigation into my allegations. So, Madam President, I call again on the UN, French, and Ouattara forces to halt all the violence, including that being done against President Gbagbo and the First Lady. They will be held responsible if any more harm comes to them. I call for an independent investigation. This is what the Africans want, into all of the atrocities committed by all military forces involved in fighting in Cote d'Ivoire. And I call on the UN, the French, and the Ouattara forces to halt immediately the death squads roving around the streets of Abidjan, disappearing supporters of President Gbagbo. They are led. I got a call from one friend down there that I would certainly not identify. They'd murder him overnight. And he was talking about how he couldn't go out. He could see bodies, corpses in the street. This was 2 days ago. And they couldn't go out there because they had snipers and they would mow them down. They're led by soldiers of the Ouattara's rebel army supported by the French and the United Nations and have killed more than 400 people in addition to perhaps the thousands killed in the bombing that we've already looked at. So right now I have several friends who give me these reports. They're saying, isn't there anything you could do now? Just if they go in now, after they've killed all these people. And I call upon, again, the United Nations, the French, which I know are not going to do it, and certainly the Ouattara rebels, and our State Department to go in and stop it. We could do it in no time at all. All this concern about Libya and all these things are going, this is just as bad. But nobody cares. Keep in mind, this is sub-Saharan Africa. So the streets are filled with the stench of rotting bodies. Mr. President, I renew my call for hearings before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee into the bombing and killings by the UN, the French, and the Ouattara rebels, and the strong evidence of massive voter fraud in the November presidential election. I appreciate Chairman John Kerry's his willingness to hold such hearings. I look forward to setting a date. The sooner, the better. I've talked to the chairman of the subcommittee, as Chairman Coons and the ranking member Isaacson, and they've agreed to have these hearings. I'm anxious to get into this so that all the world can see. Maybe we can stop this from happening again. I don't know. I also suggest that the United States step in to help and examine the possibility of seeking a place of exile for Gbagbo outside of Cote d'Ivoire. The U.S. has performed such a role before when in 1986, under the Reagan administration, Haiti's baby Doc Duvalier was sent into exile in France. So it's happened before. There's nothing wrong. The American government did this before. I'm asking them to do it again. Take these people who are being maybe murdered at this moment. We don't know. We know that they're being tortured, and allow them to go into exile. This could be an important step towards beginning a process of reconciliation that the people of Cote d'Ivoire so dearly deserve. Because this is not about the Gbagbos. It's about the modern-day return to French colonial imperialism. And this time, with the help of the United Nations, they were doing this. Here's what my concern is. Cote d'Ivoire has had a hard enough time trying to break free from the yoke of French colonialism. From the days of President Houphouët-Boigny in 1960 through Bédé in 2000, then Gbagbo when he was elected in the year 2000. Now, up to that time, the French has virtually owned all the presidents. They're all right there with France. All you have to do is go through the streets of Abidjan, what streets might be left right now. I doubt if there are many. And you'll see that that's happening. So it's not just the Gbagbos. Any president on the African continent, in sub-Saharan Africa, should know this could just as well happen to them. And their ministers and their friends. And that's what's happening right now. I'm going to show you something here that I hesitated doing, but this is the happy face of President Gbagbo. This is the face I know. This is the president who's been president since 2000, and he's gone through a lot of these same problems, but he stood up against the French and against Ouattara up in the north. Now he's been captured, and I'll show you what he looks like today. This is 3 days ago. This is today. His face is beat in from the side. He's there. He's being held on this side by someone while they're mashing his face. Then there's Simone, his wife. I happen to know her very well. Go ahead and put her picture up there. I remember in my state of Oklahoma, she's not there anymore, we had really a great congressman named J.C. Watts. He was an African-American. I just talked to him today. He was at a hearing that I testified in today. J.C. Watts was an African-American. He served in the House. And when Simone came at one time, this is Simone Gbagbo, she said, would you let me try to get me introduced to J.C. Watts, Congressman Watts? I said, yeah, I'd be glad to do it. And so I didn't know why. I went over and took her to the House of Representatives. We're in the Senate. That was in the House. He was in a committee hearing. He came out, and I said, I want to introduce you to someone who is the First Lady of Cote d'Ivoire. And she put her arms around him and started crying. And he didn't know why she was crying. And she said to him, will you forgive us? And I said, forgive you for what? J.C. Watts said, because we're the ones who sold your brothers into slavery. In the United States of America, people walk around guilty, and they should, about the slavery that they had here. But in Africa, and particularly sub-Saharan Africa and West Africa, where most of the slave trade came from, such as Cote d'Ivoire, they realized that they're the ones who sold their brothers into slavery. And here's Simone begging J.C. Watts to forgive her for selling them into slavery. At the district level, she was elected a member of parliament from her district. She was the leading way for developing a center for the care for orphans in her district. At a national level, Simone Bagbo, the First Lady, nationwide program for women to get their products to the market. No name for that program is yet found, but that's what their program is. On a continental level, Organization of African First Ladies, she was ahead of it. First Ladies Against HIV/AIDS, a forum created to establish a role of the African First Ladies in dealing with HIV needs for women and children. That's who Simone is. Isn't she pretty? That was a week ago. Let's see what she looks like today. You can't see it now. They have held her and pulled her hair out by the roots. And they went out in the streets and say, this is the hair of Simone Bagbo. I don't know what else they did to her. Use your own imagination. Brutally murdered. Now, who are these people? They were the Ouattara forces. And do you think we just made that up? Put the next one up. There they are. All of these are identified leaders of the Ouattara forces, holding her, and see what they're doing to her, and beating her and pulling her hair out. And that's what's happening today. So I only will say, and I'll conclude with this, that our State Department's got to wake up. You can't assume that if the United Nations is doing something that it's right. And we have to understand that there is this half of a continent called sub-Saharan Africa. And those people, their lives are worth just as much as they're worth in Kosovo or Bosnia or the United States or any of the other places where we go and we try to save lives. And so, again, I would say to any of our friends in any of the presidents of any of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa, put that back up. What has happened right here could very well happen to the presidents or the first ladies of your countries. I want to ask three things. Number one, stop the firing that's going on right now. People are being murdered as we speak, Madam President. Stop it. We can do it. We've got the power to do it. Our State Department has to get with the United Nations and make it happen, in spite of what the French might want. And number two, send them into exile. Give them the dignity of living in someplace else in sub-Saharan Africa so that these people, so that the people of Africa will know. Can you imagine what the people of Cote d'Ivoire will be thinking and doing in the near future if they allow this to go unanswered? That's my appeal to the United States State Department, to the United Nations, and to the French. With that, I yield the floor. I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the